Ron, Bill, that beard is getting really to be something. Yeah. David, we got to chat. David, your hair is going back to your 70s style, man. Oh, wait, hold on. Hold on. Let's bring David in here for a second. Where? Gosh. Oh, Woody, unmute David for a second. Or just you're coming back 70s style, man.
Yeah, that's right. It's my Corona cut.
Corona.
I'm holding out for a vaccination.
Wow, guys. Good to see everybody.
So I can't start YouTube for some reason. It's
Bill
just,
Wallace. Oh, you're having problems starting YouTube?
Yep. It's clicking and then just like refreshing and not starting. I don't know what's going on particularly, but I'm having a slight panic attack.
Well, don't panic. I'm sure we'll sort it out. So just for everybody out there who's maybe there's a few faces that look slightly unfamiliar. Got a lot of regulars here, but we tend to keep people muted. Sometimes we'll unmute somebody for a question or a comment. Like David seeing his hair grow back to his active band days, and we'll. But normally, if you have too many people talking at once, it just turns into chaos. So I've got Woody here and Rick LePage and Darren, and we're all going to be talking a bit about breaking the quote rules today. Woody's going to be keeping track of questions on the Zoom end of things. You can type questions into that chat window here in Zoom. Hopefully we're streaming over YouTube. Woody's panicking about that, working on that. Darren is here to be kind of monitoring that YouTube live feed, and just being a general part of the conversation and great photographer. Rick and I have some plans to potentially go out and actually do some shooting with some social distancing at a midway point, sort of in central northern Oregon, this next week. We're kind of excited about actually getting out and photographing, and I'm actually going to be headed. Oh, go ahead, Rick.
No, I am excited.
Yeah. We're going to do a little night work out on the John Day River, and then I'm actually going out tonight with the family to sleep in the van on the north side of Mount St. Helens and do a little Milky Way testing with a couple of star guiders. Star trackers. I've got a little dinky unit that I'm going to see if it holds up using a wide angle lens and a lightweight rig that you could actually take backpacking. So I'm going to test some lenses and shoot the Milky Way and play some more with that stuff and maybe try a little time lapse stuff. So fun stuff happening. Woody, how are we doing on YouTube?
I think it's not going to start till 10:05 for some reason. I don't know if the setting was wrong, but it says 10:05. So I'm going to give it 2 more minutes here and then hit the button again.
All right.
Operator error, most likely.
Well, that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Rick, you want to talk about Rick's actually been scouting this trip we're talking about out in Eastern Oregon. Maybe we'll stall for a minute before we start talking about breaking the rules till we get YouTube up.
You found this great new state park here in Oregon called Cottonwood Canyon. And
it's beautiful.
You went out, and then the next week, my wife and I, we've been itching to get the trailer out, and so we took it out there and spent 5 days, and it was just gorgeous. Some places where you just get beautiful views of Mount Adams, Mount Hood, lots of windmills. This is windmill country.
Yeah.
Modern windmills.
Yeah.
But there's some coolness there.
And it's a beautiful park with miles of trail along the river. And just really, really nicely done. I actually have to give fair credit to my good friend Steve Myers, who I kiteboard with all the time. He's this paraglider kiteboarder, just retired from Oracle, and he jokes that he retired, and then 2 weeks later the whole rest of the country retired, so he feels sort of gypped on the whole thing. But he loves to go out in his van and camp and explore and watch stars and meteor showers, and he found this spot. He's kind of our guru on the Kite Beach. We call him Yoda. And he found that spot, and it's a beautiful place. If anybody's in that general neck of the woods, it's not far from the mouth of the John Day River where it comes into the Columbia. It's near Wasco, and it's beautiful. All right. How are we doing? We got another minute here,
Yeah,
Woody.
10:05. Sorry.
All right. Well,
You can't
I
hear
hate to gyp the YouTube crowd, but we'll
You'll never
start
work
kind
in
of.
this town again.
That's it. Yeah, we're done. We're done for you know.
the days
Woody's.
of high-profile YouTubing are over.
Well, yeah. It's such a weird moment in the world, isn't it, everybody? We've been just sort of holed up too long. We're excited about just getting out photographing anything.
Yeah.
So
It keeps
I'm
telling me
gonna.
it keeps telling me invalid parameters. So
Well, if you were signed up for YouTube and you're not hearing me, I'm sorry. That's now and then we have these technical difficulties. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to get going.
Yep.
Oh, you gotta enable me to share my screen, Woody.
you got it. One sec. Done deal.
All right,
This is
here we
why
go.
doing them every week, you know, we get that
I
crisp,
know, getting the rhythm.
you know.
Bam. All right, so here we are, and I'm going to kind of get this out of the way. I've got some images of mine that I think, you know, as we talk about breaking rules, I'm thinking more about, well, hold on. Let me stop my share for a second. Let's talk about rules in general before we start talking about breaking the rules. You know, I think, you know, we have these rules in photography, and as you're learning photography, they're super helpful. I remember, you know, my first encounter with photographic rules were basically, you know, the exposure triangle, keeping everything balanced, trying to get that kind of bell-shaped curve with your exposure, making sure that your subject's in sharp focus, watching that you have clean edges, not having distractions on the edges, keeping your subject in that grid on those intersecting points. If you drew a tic-tac-toe grid through your frame, that rule of thirds rule. And you know, I think that as you start to do your photography, the rules are sometimes made to be broken. Sometimes you want the whole scene to be jet black with the subject just perfectly lit and a beam of light coming down. That histogram is going to look like a cliff coming off the left side. Everything's black except for a little tiny spike over on the right. It doesn't need to look like a bell curve. There was a good reason to break that rule. It's compelling. Sometimes the motion is what you're after, and your subject can be blurred, doesn't need to be in razor sharp focus. Sometimes the symmetry of the image is what dictates your composition, and you throw the rule of thirds out. I think all these rules are wonderful for helping us to get better at photography. They're great guidelines, they're guideposts, they're parameters to kind of generally head towards, but sometimes given the scene that you're faced with, you're gonna go off the course and chart your own course into experimental territory. And that's what tends to move art forms forward. You know, I think about Picasso and some of the Cubist stuff, and just, you know, playing with shapes and patterns and getting weird with it, or the Impressionists that painted everything sort of like it was through blurry lens. So let's jump out of here. I am going to share my screen, and I'll show you some examples of images that I have that I think break some of those rules. And then Rick's going to show you some of his, and we'll show you some examples from recent critiques that we've done in the On1 Plus community. And then we'll talk about some of the images from the masters to kind of put ourselves to shame, and in our rightful place, we'll go back to some of the great photographers.
Can I add one thing to your comments on the rules? I hate to call them rules too, because you know, they really are guides, especially as you are becoming a beginning photographer.
Mm-hmm.
But what these quote unquote rules do is they're things to think about when you're looking through the viewfinder, or when you're looking at a scene trying to imagine it through the viewfinder.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where lining things up on the rule of thirds, or using the level to make sure that your horizon is level, are great tools. But you still have to sort of make the determination of, is this the right shot? You know, you can do everything perfectly according to the rules, and it's still not an interesting shot. So it's just things to think about as you're working. And over time, I think what you find is you get, there's some intuitive mental memory that just sort of comes back, you know, and you're not even thinking about these things. These things just happen. So
that's exactly right. It's exactly right. And as you're struggling to start to craft your compositions, you know, I remember I bought this Minolta Maxim 7XI, I think it was. It was one of those ones that, you know, it had an eye detect where the autofocus would activate when you put your eye up to it. And this is back in 1990. I was just coming into the Philippines after the Gulf War, and we went into the PX, and everything was half price for those of us coming in. And I'd always dreamed of having a real camera. And I bought this Minolta, and it had this big instruction manual, this thick instruction manual, and it actually talked about the rule of thirds and a lot of these rules that we're talking about. It was the first time I ever encountered it, you know. And then as I started doing more and more photography and looking through works from photographers that I admired, you know, back in the day, it was Galen Rowell and Art Wolfe were the ones that really drew me in. You know, I was looking at what they were doing and then relating it back, and then reading instructional books and listening to photographers' lectures. And you start realizing, well, if you follow these guidelines, I think guidelines is a nice way to put it, because once you start to establish your own creative vision, your own kind of look to your images, that style that's your very own, you can realize, you know, you're gonna, like Rick said, you're gonna naturally tend to not center your subject up dead center in the frame most of the time. You're gonna start using the rule of thirds just naturally. Well, I'll put that down there, or I'll put that up there. And then you're gonna encounter a scene where you're like, wow, the symmetry of this is beautiful. And you're gonna go off and chart your own course away from the rules. So let's look at some examples of where both Rick and I have done that. Some other people that we've critiqued that we particularly enjoyed what they did that's a little off the charts, and then we'll look at some of the master's images and come back and take a bunch of questions. So I'm going to share my screen once again. And so, you know, here's a, well, I got to activate Lightroom here. Oh, I'm going to go F. There we go. So here's a scene, you know, downtown Portland. This is I've shot this scene so many times. This is my favorite so far. It was a snowy morning a couple of years ago with a full moon, and absolutely no wind. And it was the reflection, you know, the reflection pulled me in. This is a big panorama. It's huge, you know, resolution wise, but for me, putting that horizon dead center, you know, I'm not going to put the horizon down on the rule of thirds line where you would normally think to put it, because the symmetry of that reflection is what it's all about. And balancing, you know, putting the city dead center really, really works for me. Now, in this particular case, the moon kind of is off to the side a little bit, which helps a bit. But often when I encounter perfect reflections on still water or glass, I start moving into symmetry. And also architecture. I often avoid, I just throw the rule of thirds out, because often it's that symmetry that's so interesting in the scene. Sometimes in nature. Oh, go ahead. Oh, I thought Rick was going to say something. Maybe it was a cough. But anyhow, so, you know, here's a scene in Patagonia. This is the first night I ever spent really out in the wilds of Patagonia. It was driving in towards this campground on Lago Pejo in Torres de Paine National Park in Chile. And just, I remember driving in, it was blue hour. I had shot sunset. The sunset was a little disappointing. It was kind of clear. The clouds didn't go off, but driving along this lake, it was blue hour and it was just perfectly still and reflecting. And I hopped out, and, you know, I tried to put this rock in a rule of thirds place, but the way that the other rocks were in the shallows, and also just the contour of the way that the landscape was reflecting, it just worked better dead center. Now, I can't explain exactly why, but both of the major subjects here, you know, the mountain, its reflection, and the rock, are all pretty much dead center. And it was, I have other images from this, nowhere near as good. Again, you know, here's an image that breaks a couple of rules. I always want my subject to be sort of looking into the frame, not out of the frame. I want them to be in a rule of thirds position. I tend to advise people to not take the shot of the bird's butt or the animal's butt. But this is up in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, you know, and it's from a time when maybe I wasn't as it's back in 2004, so I wasn't quite as on it with my rules, but I love this shot. It really works for me. This is my favorite photo of a ptarmigan, Alaska's state bird. And this is a male bird. All the females had already turned completely brown, and it's an interesting biological thing that the females turn brown long before the males, so that they're less prone to predation as they're watching the nest. The male's job's over, so they stay white longer and get eaten by all the things that are running around looking for food in the tundra. Here's another scene where it's the rule of thirds goes out the window because she's so beautifully framed. This is in Michoacan for Dia de Muertos, the Day of the Dead. And she's just so perfectly framed between the two guys that are escorting her. It's like the shot is dead center. It just works that way.
And this is also another one of those rules that people tell you, don't cut someone off at the edge of the frame.
Yeah.
It's like the limbs. Don't if you're going to put a picture of someone in there, get them from the waist up or get their full body in there. And this provides a balance. The two people on the edge provide a balance to the woman in the center.
Right. But the shot's all about her. So I filled the frame with her. It just, that's what, and to be honest with you, this was one where I wasn't spending a lot of time thinking about it. They were walking towards me through a crowd, and I had a 70-200 in my hand, and it's just bing, this is what spoke to me as I shot. Probably 4 frames of that. My buddy Andy on a trip in the Olympic National Park, filming some stuff for On One way back in Perfect Photo Suite 9, I think. And just, I love the diagonal leading line of this rope coming down to it. I was like, hang on a second, as he came climbing up toward me, but dead center, that's what worked for the scene. Again, I love to make lines diagonal and come from one side into the frame. But, this scene, we had been out shooting. We were on our way to Steens Mountain in the Alvord Desert in Southern Oregon. And this is back when I was dating Stacy before we got married and had kids. But, we were driving, and there was this spectacular sunset, and we were in sagebrush, and and I saw this little hill, and I remember I accelerated to about as fast as my Volkswagen TDI that I had at the time would get, and we got to the top of this little hill, and sure enough, the 3 sisters were there, and I was shooting those, and then she was out with her cell phone shooting, and I just thought, wow, what a fun shot. And I did a shallow depth of field and dead center, and kind of putting her head in those clouds. And sometimes the scene just dictates. Here's one where it doesn't need to be razor sharp. This was all happening so fast. I was in the front of the boat trying not to fall in with this monstrous Nile crocodile in Lake Victoria. And, I think that it's even more menacing, slightly out of focus with a bit of motion blur going and all that water blasting around. So that there are other shots where it's sharp, but that one with the motion really speaks to me of how terrifying that beast is. Here's one where you never want to put your subject down on the edge. You want to fill the frame, right? Well, in this case, I'm filling the frame with what's important to me, which is those ridges, those smoky, hazy ridges. This is up at the high camp on Mount Adams, looking towards the sort of southeast, not far from Mount Hood. That might actually be the shoulder of Mount Hood starting to rise right there. And just, I loved putting the camp down in the bottom of this frame. What was important was getting a long lens view to kind of compress the distance between those ridges and the camper, but fill the frame with it. Here's another one where I talk about, architecture dictates symmetry to me. And Rick and I were looking over some of these images that we were choosing yesterday. He's like, well, you're slightly off center. And that's true. I don't know what exactly led me to be slightly, more to the right than to the left, but still it's that kind of dead center running through, that doorway out in the middle, the framing, taking you right into the middle. I find that, often when I'm photographing man-made objects, it's the symmetry that draws me in, and I tend to kind of throw the rule of thirds out. Here's one. This is a self-portrait on the Olympic coast. This is a part you have to backpack into. I think it's just south of Toliak Point. There was this huge old growth stump that had washed up on the shore, and I was photographing it, and I I thought, there's no way anybody's going to realize how big this thing is without someone in it for scale. This is on that trip with Andy years ago, and he was off setting up some campfire thing to do some filming, and I was by myself, so I just put myself in the scene. And I often talk about line of sight and how you want your subject to be looking into the frame, to draw your eye into the frame. Well, there's no way to do that with this. I mean, it would look so odd for me to be looking back at the stump instead of out to sea. To me, this scene just mandated, violating that rule, and it totally works for me. Here's another one where both of my subjects are looking out of the frame, but they're balanced. This is my great friends, John Eastcott and Eva Mumatuk, who I have to call later because it's her birthday today, in Patagonia. And this is a spot that some of the folks watching that were in Patagonia with me will recognize. It's a spectacular place to shoot sunrise, just out of El Chaltán, Argentina. And it's a spot that I only know about because of these two amazing National Geographic photographers. I spent many a morning out there with them. Here similar. The vehicle and my cousin Rio balance each other, even though both are staring out of the frame and down towards the edge. Again, to me, this whole image is about the sky. And I was just looking, we were near the Petrified Forest is that a national park? I think it's a national park. And it's just grassland, flat grassland around there. And the sunset was so beautiful and the clouds were so great. The only thing I could think to use was the car and my cousin. and they're both looking out of the frame, but they're balancing each other. Here's one where my horizon is just completely off. This is a trip that actually Rick and his wife Susan and my wife Stacy and I went on for a wedding for a dear friend of ours, Duncan, and his wife Katerina in Greece. And this is in Thessaloniki, and there's this really cool art. And I was trying to find a way to photograph these umbrellas, and all I had with me was a 24-70, and so I'm at 24 here, and then having my wife step in kind of made it much cooler image, but there was no way to frame it up without being a little diagonal and have the sun in there. So it just this composition is what worked for me. I have a whole bunch of shots, and this one with everything cattywampus, it just works better. Sometimes ignore the fact that you're supposed to have the horizon straight.
Well, yeah, and one of the things that I would say is, we talk about rules and breaking rules, but the thing that you're trying to achieve most of the time when you're shooting, I just say most of the time, is balance.
Yep.
And sometimes that balance is achieved best through doing something like people looking out of the frame, or the horizon off, or the focus not quite right, and right. Again, this is back to when you're looking through the viewfinder, that's when you need to make those decisions about what's going to give me the best balance. So,
and just so everyone knows, I was laying on my stomach with the lens almost on the ground as I took this photo too.
Yeah
Very cool. It is a really cool place. Here's one that Rick's actually a big advocate of not putting diagonal lines right into the corner of the frame. But for me, this one really does work because of the triangles that it forms of, this is in Patagonia again, outside El Chaltán. And this is Mount Fitzroy and Mount Cerro Torre, two of the most famous peaks in Patagonia. I think the Patagonia clothing logo is sort of this range. It's like the Tetons on steroids. And so you got this triangle right here, this triangle right here, this triangle right here, and then all these angular peaks in the background. And for me, just, maybe it's a little Pink Floyd-y, but I like the fact that those diagonals go right into the corners on this frame.
No, again, with this image, there's a balance to it that works. Mm-hmm. It's not that a rule is broken. It's your mind made that connection that, yes, I want those lines coming from both corners.
Yep. Yeah. So. And that's it for me. So I'm going to jump in here. Rick provided fewer, but some beautiful images. Oh, wait, sorry. Let's go. There we go. I love this one.
Yeah. So this is one where I was just out shooting in a bay up in northern Washington one night, and there was just kind of beautiful light. And I love these sailboats. And I have 3 shots of this, and the one that works best is the one with the horizon slightly askew and pushed, and the sailboat pushed way up into the corner, right? You know,
Yeah.
what's the subject? It's the sailboat. Shouldn't it be a little bit closer to the rule of thirds, or, you know, down? But this one worked for me.
Well, and that's interesting because it's similar to some of the ones that I just showed where my subject is, I think they were down at the bottom.
Yeah.
But what was interesting in those images to me was the sky or the ridges reaching out
Yep.
towards the sky. And in this case, it's that beautiful water. The
Yeah.
water has such a gorgeous texture that's catching that light. And I'm sure the sky is somewhat bland.
Yes, exactly.
You know?
That's what was going on. A very
Yeah.
bland, hazy sky.
But beautiful texture on the water.
And then
Right.
this one. So, you know, the you know, as I said earlier, you know, you don't cut your subject off at the knees. And my wife and I were out in the Zumwalt Prairie in northeastern Oregon, which is a beautiful place. We had this beautiful sky. I mean, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's still pretty bright out. And I just took all of these photos of her just looking off into the distance. And of the ones that I shot, I have a whole bunch of her, you know, where you can see her entire frame. And yet she's reduced so much in that frame. And this one just, it just works for me.
Yep.
You know?
Absolutely.
And this is another one. I was out, you know, playing around in Portland one day, and I love the play of the signs and the reflection. And I shot one just sort of straight on with everything sort of level. And I looked at it on the viewfinder or the screen on the back afterwards, and I'm like, it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just applied a little bit of angle to it, and I got a more compelling image. You know, it's still not an amazing image, but it works better than the straight on shot.
I like it. And it's that point that I frequently try to make. If you have straight lines in your scene, do what you can to try to turn them diagonal. Not always, but often it just leads to a more compelling frame.
Yeah, and here's another just sort of straight on reflection shot.
Yeah.
You know, and I have one with a little bit more sky and a little bit less reflection, and it just doesn't work. You know.
I love this.
And here's
one.
another straight on.
Yeah.
You know, I
Symmetry.
almost have the lines coming out of the corners, but not quite. But again,
Not quite.
This, I was down here this one day, and for whatever reason, I was just obsessed with the light. And this is a BART station in San Francisco. And I was shooting all of this stuff. I was shooting people, and I just walked down this side, and it was just like, it was so stark and architectural. And this is one where I just wanted that symmetry, you know, smack on.
Super cool. Yeah, I love that.
And then focus, you know, I play a lot with defocusing. A lot of times when I'm out shooting at night or, you know, in the middle of the day, I'll actually go into manual focus mode and start playing around with a composition that I like, but I'm not seeing anything when everything's tack sharp. And this was a night I was wandering around New York with my daughter, and we were just shooting, and the blue hour was just beautiful, but I couldn't find anything that really worked for me. And then we were standing waiting to cross this street, and I'm just watching this parade of cars come down and the lights changing. And, you know, I spent probably 25 minutes. I think my daughter, who is a photographer as well, was finally like, okay, Dad, I think we have enough pictures of out of focus cars and lights. Let's move on.
I can hear her saying that with more sarcasm dripping.
Yes, a lot more sarcasm. But, you know, this is, you know, again, and it's not so much breaking rules, because there really are no rules, but it's a thing of, you get in a situation and you look at something and you feel that there's an image there's some sort of photograph. You know, start playing around with those if what you're seeing in the viewfinder and on your screen isn't giving you that image that you thought was there, you know.
Yeah, this one actually grows on me the more I look at it. It's got this just there's an energy that's really cool.
And this is a
the
place,
tree.
Waldo Lake, which Hudson and I both love. It's down in Central Oregon. And this is, a pano. And so, for me, for a long time, I actually did not like this photograph because that tree on the far right of the frame, right, or far left of the frame,
Yeah.
There's nothing to balance it on the other side. It to me, it was not very good. And yet I had a couple people request prints of this image, and I'm like, why? And it's as near as I can, tell, the feeling is that tree actually pushes your eye into the frame. You've got this long, wide frame, and this tree on the left just sort of stops you from going out of the frame.
Yeah.
And to the left of that tree is a giant mush of trees. I've been trying for years to try and get that tree in a better place, and this is about the best I could get. So, it's just thinking about these things. And when I first built this pano, I did it without the tree in it. So I just cropped to the right, and it just felt like a desktop shot to me.
Yep.
And not a very good one at that.
If anybody gets a chance to go to Waldo Lake, it's a really special lake. It's the most blue. It's like purple blue, the water when you're out canoeing. I've done some canoe camping along the shore there. That's just mind-bendingly wonderful. Great spot, and this takes me right back to there. All right, well, let's look at a few images that we've recently seen in our OM1 Plus critiques that break the rules. So Rick and I, every month we do these critiques for the OM1 Plus community. For those of you that aren't in Plus, people submit images, and we go through all the submissions and pick out images to comment on that we can give some teaching notes, as well as images that really deserve praise that everyone should see from the community. And this is one of our regular contributors, Numa's image. Crazy.
And it's again, it's just like splitting it right down the middle. It's kind of the gold medal flower building is centered. It in some ways you think it doesn't work, but you keep coming back to this photograph, and it does, even though everything is kind of bunched up on the left. It still has a balance and a tension that makes it a good image.
Yep. And we've got this is David Harris, another frequent contributor, a familiar place, Haystack Rock, which is a spot that I always take. I actually usually teach a North Coast Oregon workshop, and we stay at a hotel where you can walk out to this view. And I love the long exposure here. I think that splitting the image dead in half, at the horizon, it's a little bit above. Yeah. But the way that the waves are pulling out in this, I just love it. I love the motion in it.
And this is another time where the focal points, the rocks are
way
up at the top of the frame.
Yeah, way up at the top. Yeah.
But the way you just sort of get led into the frame is just beautiful. And this was a really intelligent shot on David's point of view, from David's perspective. He waited for the water to be going out when he shot that long exposure, and it sort of really does give that sense of motion, and I love the fact that he's thinking about that type of stuff.
Yeah, totally. And then finally we got Keith,
which breaks every rule in the book, and yet is a marvelous image.
Yeah.
This one's got a skewed horizon. It's got the line coming right out of the corner. One line, not even both.
Yeah.
It's got this block of stuff coming into the frame on the left, and yet we talked when we first talked about this photo. It's like if you straightened this horizon, it would not have the same impact that this photograph has this way. That saguaro cactus on the right is straight, and that just kind of balances the frame.
I still almost wonder if the robe bed is tilted.
Yeah, yeah, and that
like some of
very
those
well
shots in Death Valley where you level your fluid head and you start shooting and everything looks cockeyed and you're like,
Yep.
oh, well, that's because I'm on this big Piedmont coming down out of the mountains and everything is angled down to the left, you know. I wonder. I don't know. Because the cactuses look like they're reaching straight up into the sky. But you know, this image creates that tension. You're like, well, what is happening here?
Yeah.
You know, and I might still, you know, try to do something about that tree, but you don't have to. Yeah, I know.
This is a very successful photograph as
it
is.
Yeah.
You know,
Agreed.
and again, you know, there's balance, there's tension, it works.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's, you know, think about the rules as the places to start, but when you're looking through the viewfinder, really think about those elements when you're in there. So
yeah, I love when the sky does that.
Yeah, Rob says that looks like it could be a movie poster.
Right? It totally looks like a movie poster. Exactly. Yeah. If only there were movies, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's jump in and we'll wrap up our kind of screen sharing presentation here with some of the greats. So we've got this
Henri Cartier-Bresson. This is one of his most famous images, Place de l'Europe, I think. And, you know, this is chaos. There's a person jumping out of the frame. It's not in focus. It's like, what is this stuff on the left? And yet everything, yes, that boot that is not quite touching the water. This is where Henri Cartier-Bresson's, you know, famous decisive moment came from. You know, is that knowing when to shoot, take that shot.
He didn't have 10 frames a second back in the day.
No, he did not. You know?
Or a light meter in his camera.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. No, amazing. I've always adored this image, and it, you know, talk about heading straight out of the frame, but you're like, you get your eye actually goes back to, well, where did that all happen? Where did it start? Just move. And this guy in the background, kind of shuffling over by the fence, just amazing.
And this is Vivian Maier.
Yeah, I love her.
For those of you who don't know Vivian Maier, she's a woman who was a photographer, Chicago in the 40s and 50s, or no, 50s and 60s.
50s and 60s.
Totally unknown. She died, and with like tens of thousands of images in a storage unit. Some guy bought them. A couple people bought them actually, and they're just stunning photographs. I mean, her work is just unbelievably beautiful.
Well, and it winds up, she worked as a nanny for years and years, and she drugged these kids around with her photographing.
Yeah. And she
photography.
And there's very little known about her, you know, like I've always wondered, you know, did she share anything?
Mm-hmm.
There's actually, Mark just reminded me, there's a wonderful documentary about her. It's a little bit heavy on the dude who first bought a significant portion of her stuff, but it's really worth watching.
Finding Vivian Maier.
Yeah. I mean, her self-portraits alone are stunning. I mean, she would be wandering the streets and find reflections and stuff like that. But
and there's lots that break rules about this particular image of hers.
And the biggest one is the lack of focus, right? I mean, you know, she's on a rule of thirds line. This is a square. She shot with a Rolleiflex, you know, a square format 6x6. You know, it's not very well exposed except for her. Yep. And yet the story in this, I would argue, is better told with this woman in a little bit of soft focus than it would be if she were tack sharp. You know, and
I love the way that these lines sort of almost create like an arrow pointing in.
Yep.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty cool.
So. You want to talk about this one?
Well, this is Arnold Newman, who's sort of my favorite portrait photographer.
Do you have the final version?
I do.
Why don't you show that first?
Let's show that first. Oh wait, I do. Where did it go? Hang on, I swear we had it. There it is. Okay. There. Yeah. So that's That's the final version that went to print. This is Igor Stravinsky at his piano, and it violates all these rules about, I mean, certainly putting your subject down in the very bottom left corner of the frame. And yet, what a beautiful piece of modern art in a portrait at the same time, and your eye goes immediately. And then you look at, how did he get there? Well, here's the contact sheet.
Yep.
And
And
the
so for
crop.
those of you who think you have to shoot and everything that's in the viewfinder is what your photo should be, that's not true at all.
Yep.
You know, I mean, this is a wonderful document, this one right here.
Yeah.
Because he figured out what was the shot that he wanted, and,
Yep.
the rest is history.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
And this is another one of his of
Right.
his images.
So this is Glenn Gould, very famous pianist from Canada. And again, pushing everything to the left, leaving all of this negative space, or pushing everything to the right, negative space on the left. It's balanced, it works. But again, it's like, wouldn't it have been better with him in the center? No, it would not have been.
No.
So.
He did that a lot too.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
And,
if you're interested in environmental portraiture, Arnold Newman is one of the best.
one of the nicest.
Irving Penn.
And Irving Penn too. And one of the nicest presents I've had in a long time. Rick gave me this just beautiful, beautiful book of Arnold Newman's prints. I have smaller, more like typical coffee table books, and Rick got me the big, beautiful one that you can just drool over, with gloves on or hands totally washed.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it, because I really do look at his work and just always marvel at the creativity and the power to like say something about someone in a frame with just the camera. This isn't.
So this is Saul Leiter, who is a photographer, street photographer, actually fashion photographer in New York in the 50s, and he violated so many rules. If he'd shoot from under umbrellas and under awnings and things like that, and yet they give you a sense of the city in a way that other street photographers didn't. Why don't you go to the next shot? I mean, we just run through these quickly.
Love
this
that
is
one.
actually is Ernst Haas, who's another one.
Again, not in order. Okay.
This is Saul Leiter again.
Mhm.
It's like he's put all these things on the outer edges of the frame, and the subject really is the guy in the center. But is it not? You look at it and your first thought is chaos.
Yeah.
But there is a balance to this again. So.
Yeah.
Just give me the next one. Oh, okay. So this is Eugene Richards.
Wait. Let's look. You sure?
No, it's okay. Yeah, let's just end with this one, I think.
All right.
So Eugene Richards is another street photographer, and this is one where, there's chaos and yet there's balance. I mean, this is another decisive moment shot, right?
Absolutely.
And yet, what one of the things that your eye, it all works, but you're like, wait a minute, it's crooked. The shot is crooked.
This woman's hidden behind the pole.
Yeah, I mean, there's all of this stuff, and yet it works beautifully because that girl in the center with the art, she's straight up, and it's just, it's one of those wonderful, how does it work thing. And that's something that Richards, he clearly had a couple of seconds to take this shot. He saw something happening,
All the lines were diagonal.
Yeah. So
it's really cool. And then I've thrown in, this is Andre Kurtz. And I think this is like 1927 in Paris. They're still repairing war damage from the First World War. And you just, there's your subjects are both at the very, very top and at the very, very bottom. And I don't know. There's just something about this whole scene. There's this tension between the train up at the top and this man carrying this newspaper wrapped parcel dead center at the base of the frame.
And cut off.
Yeah, and cut off. The parcel's even partially cut off. But the gear that you're working with in the 20s, I mean, it's just amazing. This is this amazing view to another generation, he lived in Paris most of his life and then ended his life in New York. And just going through his work from childhood to the last days in his apartment in New York are just, it's wonderful. I'm really, really enamored with the work of Andre Kurtz. So to get a chance to go through these, I just took cell phone photos from one of my books last night. So if they're a little cockeyed or crooked or they've got a little weird light on them, this one's called Siesta from Paris in the next year, 1928. And I just, again, the subject down at the bottom. And what really makes the scene for me is this guy up in the top right walking through. There's this completely distracting little bit of white where the tree and the distortion from the lens are arcing through. But God, just what a great moment there.
Yeah.
And then all three I chose are from Paris, and similar. You can see his style is to sort of, balance these things out with diagonal lines and drawing your eye to the corner. Long ago, this is in the 60s, later in his life. But I just love the lines of this on the Seine. And then I've got one shot from Sebastião Salgado where, you look at this for a minute and you're like, what is going on? This is from his most recent, probably maybe his greatest book, Genesis, where he'd spent so many years doing war photography and famines and refugee crises. He decided to go and take a look at the parts of the world that really haven't been touched by civilization. And this is deep in the jungles of New Guinea. And these people are foragers, and I mean, what an amazing composition. I don't know, it's just crazy. It just blows my mind. I don't know that I would see that way. You'd be drawn to put that person in the rule of thirds position, and just there's something so cool about all the structure of that. So I think that's all that we've got in here. Let's jump out, get back to faces here, and take some questions about breaking the rules or just anything in general. Woody, you're still around here? Wait, I don't hear Woody. Is Woody muted? He's muted.
Well, Bill Marhofer said, add one question in the chat. Okay. He said, do you see the value in breaking the rules to create unique compositions that stand out from the usual?
Say that one more time. Sorry, I was working on unmuting Woody. I heard Bill Marhofer. Do I see, what is it again?
Do you see value in breaking the rules to create unique compositions that stand out from the usual?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's although I wouldn't go bending those rules just for the sake of it to try to force getting something that's different. I mean, I think trying to see what's important to you you have to look for those situations where what speaks to you and your artistic vision, your style dictates kind of breaking those rules. So, but I think, as you're developing your style, yes, playing with bending those rules and determining, that you're going to be known more for the images that you took that broke all the rules that worked than for the images that you took that were perfect examples of images that other people have taken. And let's face it, it was easier in the days of Henri Cartier-Bresson and Andre Kurtz to create images unlike things that anyone had ever seen, because there weren't that many images. And today, how many billions of images are out there on all the social media platforms. So yes, breaking the rules a little bit to stand out makes a lot of sense. That's one reason that I got so enamored with panoramas. It originally for me was about the fact that as I went into digital, I was working with 12 megapixels and I wanted to make big giant prints. And so I was stitching together images to get more resolution. But then I came to realize that it also gave me the opportunity to represent, commonly photographed scenes in a completely different way, at a different focal length, at a different, just in a totally different way of seeing the world. And I think that really helped get me going photographically, was having a little different take on things through the panoramic technique. So yes, I do.
I think we've been a little disingenuous in this whole breaking the rules thing, because it's, again, if you you're trying to create art here, right? I mean, that's what most of us are doing. And while there are classical things that work in composition, it still comes down to looking through the viewfinder and trying to realize what you see in a photograph.
Mhm.
And, you know, there are ways to create pure chaos in a photograph that works, but it's hard to do. You know, what you're looking for is some sort of balance, and balance is everything. You know, balance is looking at leading lines, looking at where is your subject, what is the subject. I mean, you know, so.
Yeah.
There are a few questions here lined up if you guys want to take some.
Yep.
So
Let's
Jim
do it.
Bridger asked, you've mentioned that you used to oversaturate your pictures and now you don't. The question is when is too much too much? Is it personal taste? When do you guys choose to push it?
Which Supreme Court justice was it that says that you know it when you see it on the pornography case?
Yes.
Clarence Thomas.
Yeah. Well, no, it's that's funny. It is a matter of personal taste. However, I will say that, you know, when I was a young photographer and I started working with some of the people that are my mentors, like for example, John and Eva, they would make comments to me like, well, you're making very beautiful images, a little colorful for me. You know, it was like a kind way of putting it, you know, and now as I go back and I look at my images from those days, I'm like, oh, wow, you know, turn the neon down, turn that saturation down. You know, when I re-edit things from 10 years ago, I invariably am turning my saturation and my contrast down. I was after that pop. And I think that the longer you play this game, the longer you practice, you're more likely to settle into a routine where you're going for a little more of a natural look. So I don't know, Rick, do you want to? Maybe you have something to add to that.
I've noticed that in the last 3 years, I rarely touch the saturation and vibrance sliders. I rarely do global saturation changes. When I do, it's because I have a print and I want a little more color.
Yeah.
What I will do more is do local color correction or changes, you know.
Yep.
But again, I'm striving for balance, and the problem to me is the screen. You know, the screen looks beautiful when you crank up those colors. But if you start looking in at an image and you start zooming in, you start to see things like things break down. The relationship between color is not natural.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I have no problem with saturated images. I have a problem with oversaturated images because they tend to break down other things, other areas of an image.
And if you're really after that beautiful blue sky in your frame and it's a bit washed out, you know, in the field, try a polarizer. You'll start learning when that works for you and doesn't work for you. In post-production, go into whatever software you're working in. You know, I work mainly in One and Lightroom, but both of them have the ability to jump into the blue channel in hue, saturation, and luminance, and just pull the luminance down on the blue. Instead of boosting global saturation to get your blue sky, pull the luminance channel down on blue. And one of the nice things in Lightroom is if there's someone standing in the foreground with a blue backpack and suddenly that makes their backpack turn into this ugly color of blue, just go in there and mask off the black backpack so it's not being applied. You know, there's some real easy ways to go about this without oversaturating your entire image.
Next question, Cindy asked, what's the current rule for taking photos in public places where individual faces are clearly recognizable? Do I need a release or just to post on my own website or social media?
You do
Absolutely not. No, you know, so I worked for a while doing stock photography as that went off the cliff. You know, I sort of went into becoming a represented artist at Getty, right? As artists started making no money at all. And I jumped back out of that and went into doing more photo education work. And in the, the rule is if you're going to sell a product using someone's likeness or their property, you need a model release or a property release. For editorial work, your local newspaper does not get a model release when they take a picture of, here in Portland, they're in those couple blocks around the Justice Center and they take a picture of the crowd at the protest. They don't have to get 1,000 model releases to put those people's faces up on the front page of the Oregonian, if the Oregonian really had a front page, or on their website. It's editorial. It's about a news story. They're informing the public. If you're literally just, putting up your work for yourself and you're not selling toothpaste with it, no, you don't need a model release. If
You
you're
can sell prints, though. You can sell prints.
You can sell prints, yes.
You can sell prints, but not coffee mugs.
Right.
Right.
Oddly. Yeah. There's, here
Well, it's advertising. Advertising is really what, you see this every once in a while. Someone comes out and says, some woman's walking down the street and sees her photo on the side of a bus selling a cell phone.
Oh yeah, that's a problem.
If there's not a model release for that, yes, but
or up as a big piece of art in a store, also a problem. You wouldn't necessarily. You can sell a print, but you can't sell the rights to print it in all the REI stores, right?
Yes.
Giant on their walls. There's like these little finite. I'm going to putting my lawyer hat on here for a second. Oh, and I just digress. I hope that makes it pretty clear for your own use, for your own website. Don't worry at all. Even if you were going to give it to the newspaper to put out in an article, it's editorial. Woody made these hats for our photo contest winners that we had in the office hours, who've all got their prints now. Thanks to Rick, made beautiful prints for them, and we included these hats. And he made a completely different color for the photo contest winners. So nobody but those of you that got those hats have this color, which is kind of fun. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Kudos to Woody. They're one-offs. If I ever see anybody with the rust-colored Hudson Henry hat, I know you were the winner.
There you go. You got to win the next photo contest if you want.
I was going to say, you better start working on the next photo contest, Hudson. You get some angry customers.
Not for sale.
Yeah, we won't make any more of these except for photo contest winners.
There you go.
All right, what's the next question?
Let's see here. What is the biggest rule you break the most?
Well, I would say I'm torn between putting my subject. It's probably centering up my subject and not using the rule of thirds, just because the symmetry of the scene, the balance of the scene calls for it. What about you, Rick?
Same thing.
Jim Lang says speeding.
Yeah, I think. What about you? What about you, Darren?
It's probably centering as well, honestly.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you go. I think David Archer's still unmuted. You got a comment on that, David?
What was the question?
Oh, what's the rule that you break the rule you break the most? As a
Let me go
You're out of your ears.
Let me give it my wife. She'll tell you.
Well, I bet because you do so much wildlife, it's probably centering up too. Yeah.
Yeah, probably guilty of that more than anything, I'd say.
It's not guilty. It's just about finding balance. All right, Woody.
Do you consider composition rules first, and then if those don't work, you look to break them, or when you break the rules is something that's kind of planned out? And that's from John Duncombe.
I think Rick put it really well. It's like as you're looking through the viewfinder, you think, does this work? And I think my general rule with composition is I think about my foreground and I think about my background, and I think about what elements I want to put together, and then I look to simplify the scene, to not have things that I don't want in there. So it's what do I want to put together, what do I want to exclude, how do I position myself at what focal length to do that, and then once I get in that position, I start kind of organizing things in the frame. And this all sounds like this checklist. But the more you do these things, the more it just sort of happens automatically. But I do tend to, if I'm going to be doing a tripod-based landscape shot, I do run around with my camera and think about where I want to put my tripod before I go to the work of getting the legs all organized in the right spot. And then you start fine tuning. You can shift a little left, you can shift a little right, you can tilt up, tilt down, raise lower. And it's rare that I just dial in the shot that I'm after right like that. I mean, that's a very rare thing. You typically take multiple shots working on some different things. And sometimes it's not till you get into post-production that you realize, wow, that really did work better centered up. I think it's good to experiment. I think that electrons are cheap and memory cards don't, they're huge these days. So practice different compositions, try it different ways, see what works best for you. And it may be that you sleep on it and look through your images and find that, wow, on the bigger screen, this thing I didn't think was going to work really did. And that's fun.
I got 2 more questions. Let's try and pack them in. It's 11 o'clock now. We'll go over a little bit, but one from Ron, one from Bill Wallace. So Ron Comstock asked, when breaking a rule, should we be aware of other rules not to break? Is there one rule that should never be broken?
Don't forget your camera.
Lock your tripod head.
Yeah, okay, that absolutely, like making sure that your camera, that's a rule I would prefer you never break. Make sure that you protect yourself and your gear. I've had workshops where participants that I see looking at me right now in the viewfinder and I both had a hard time with our cameras at Thor as well. And one blew down on the tripod into rocks and mine got inundated with salt water and we dealt with it. But taking care of your gear is the only, and your body. Don't put yourself in a dangerous situation to get a photograph. Otherwise, I think all the rules are malleable. They're guidelines. They're there to experiment with, and like I said, chart your own course. They're gonna generally work better than not using them. That's what they are.
All right, last one. It's a little off the rules thing, but we talked about beforehand about focus stacking. Bill wanted to know, for shooting the Milky Way, can you use focus stacking, or is there too much movement in a 30-second exposure?
You can use, well, the way that the focus stacking software works is it's looking for the sharpest elements to put together. So if it doesn't have something that's perfectly sharp, it's still going to include, as the entire image. It's not going to leave gaps just because something's blurred a little bit. And again, a 30-second exposure, it depends a little bit on what focal length you're working with. I would say that if you're thinking about focus stacking for the Milky Way, it's more about sort of compositing. You capture an image with the foreground in focus, and you can use your headlamp or a bright light to get that foreground focus that you want after you shoot the stars at infinity. Our modern mirrorless cameras, both the latest and greatest from Sony and from Nikon, and I'm sure Canon too, although I haven't done it, you can zoom in and focus on a star at night, a bright star or a planet. It's amazing. You can dial in focus and nail it on a pinpoint just by making it as small as possible, manually focusing. So I would argue that, if you're into focus stacking, start thinking about star stacking. Start thinking about capturing a series of images faster than 30 seconds to get pinpoint stars, and then blend those in an app like Starry Landscape Stacker or Sequitur for PC, Starry Landscape Stacker for Mac, Sequitur for PC. And then take a composite shot with the foreground in focus, and you can put that foreground in. I mean, if you're into compositing and doing focus stacking, think about star stacking to get the stars sharp too. I mean, absolutely compositing with Milky Way stuff. But what I'm really getting into now, and what I'm going to go out and do tonight, is play with a star tracker, where it actually has the camera moving at the same rate that the Earth is revolving, so that the stars stay still in the frame, and you can do really long exposures. But you need to turn it off and shoot your foreground sharp, and then turn it on and shoot the Milky Way and composite the two together. And that, honestly, since I've started playing with it this last month, is the most exciting thing I've done with Milky Way, because all of a sudden it opens up a whole world of lighter weight, sharp lenses that will just give you amazing results, and higher megapixel cameras that you can keep at a lower ISO, and just get amazing results that you don't have to make as many sacrifices or spend $2,000 on that 3-pound piece of glass that you cart along with you just for doing Milky Way work. So that's my take at this moment. I'm going to be sharing more about that as I keep delving into it.
Great. Well, I think that's it, everyone. How do you guys feel about it?
Yeah, I think it's good. Do you want to talk just a little bit about what we're doing in a couple of weeks there?
Wait 1 second. Jerry had a really good comment in the chat window that's worth repeating. He said he comes from a formal photographic background. He worked at Brooks Institute. And he says, I remember one line from the very first art concept class, quote, all you have to create with is light, shadow, texture, and form. And very little was said about the rule of thirds. And I will echo that and just say quickly that all of these rules of composition, the way they're taught today, you find a million websites that have the 10 rules of composition, the 7 rules, the 5 rules, the whatever rules. You know, all of that stuff is fairly recent with digital photography.
Yep.
Because you didn't get taught those specific things, especially early on in your photographic career, you know, or your education. So I'll just say that. Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Well, I was just going to say, I think we're gonna take a week off here. For one thing, Rick and I are probably going to be out east shooting. Well, he'll be to the west, I'll be to the east, and we're going to be out shooting. So we're going to take a 2-week break here. We'll come back together in 2 weeks, and we're going to talk about gear, and we're going to talk a little bit about the state of the photographic industry in the COVID age, and also what gear we use and why, and take lots of questions about gear, because we get, you know, we sometimes try to avoid it a bit, but we get so many questions about gear. So let's just go there and rock out a session just talking about gear. Well, and any other questions that you guys have.
We had a bunch of questions left over from this week that we couldn't get to that were all gear focused. We'll put those in the queue for next time as well. So
Indeed.
If we didn't get to your gear question this week, we'll do our best to get to it in a couple of weeks.
Indeed. All right. So everybody, I hope you have a great couple of weeks. You know, even if you're in a situation where you don't have the ability to go too far from home, practicing is still important, and there's plenty to photograph close by. So, you know, it's actually a good exercise, but we'll be back out there in the beautiful places before too long, I'm sure.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. Thanks so
Take
much.
care.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Ciao.